The text message came through during her morning coffee. 3 words that shattered 5 years of marriage. We're done. Goodbye. No explanation, no call, just cold pixels on a screen. Sarah stared at her phone, hands trembling, as the second message arrived. Already filed the papers? Don't contact me. She didn't know that in exactly 2 hours, she'd walk into her own company's headquarters and find her husband kissing her best friend in the executive boardroom. She didn't know they'd been planning this for months, stealing from her while she worked late nights, building an empire they thought belonged to someone else. But most of all, they didn't know that the poor secretary wife they pitied and discarded was actually the woman who signed every single one of their paychecks. So when Sarah finally arrived at that office, calm and composed, what she did next didn't just shock them. It destroyed everything they'd built on lies. The coffee had gone cold in her hands. Sarah sat in the tiny apartment she'd insisted they keep, the one Ethan called your little hobby space whenever he visited. He preferred staying at his downtown loft, the one he said his salary afforded him, the one she'd actually purchased through a shell company and let him believe he'd earned. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Jessica, her best friend since college, the woman who'd held her through her father's funeral, the woman she'd hired as head of marketing at Hartwell Industries, the billion-dollar tech empire Sarah had inherited and transformed in secret. Jessica's message read, "Babe, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Ethan told me everything. You deserve so much better. Come by the office today. I'll take you to lunch. We can talk." Sarah's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The pieces were falling into place now, sharp and cutting. She opened her laptop and accessed the private server only she and her head of security, Marcus, could reach. The surveillance footage from Hartwell Industries loaded slowly, frame by frame. There they were, Ethan and Jessica. 3 months of meetings in conference rooms that should have been empty. Lunches that lasted hours. His hand on her waist in the parking garage. Their lips meeting in the shadows of Sarah's own building, beneath the portrait of her late father that hung in the lobby. She scrolled further back. 6 months, a year. The theft had been subtle. Jessica approving inflated vendor contracts and splitting the difference with dummy companies. Ethan, who worked in business development, steering clients toward those same vendors. Together, they'd siphoned nearly $2 million. They thought they were stealing from some faceless corporation. They had no idea they were stealing from her. Sarah closed the laptop and stood, smoothing down her simple gray dress. The same dress Ethan had once called frumpy before leaving for another business trip that she now knew had been a weekend with Jessica in the Hamptons. She remembered their wedding day, how Ethan had cried reading his vows, promising to build a life with her, how Jessica had been her maid of honor, weeping with joy. Sarah had loved them both so completely, so blindly, that she'd never seen the truth. Love wasn't blind. Desperation was. After her father died, she'd inherited everything, his company, his wealth, his legacy. But she'd also inherited his enemies, people who'd see a young woman as weak, easy to manipulate. Her father's attorney had advised her to stay hidden, to run the company from behind carefully constructed corporate veils. Let people think the mysterious CEO was some reclusive billionaire. Stay small in your personal life. Stay invisible. So she had. She'd played the struggling secretary at a mid-sized firm, the job she'd held before her father's death. She'd kept the modest apartment. She'd let Ethan believe he was the breadwinner, that his $60,000 salary supported them both. She'd wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she owned. But Ethan had never loved who she was. He'd loved who he thought he was, superior, provider, destined for greatness. And when that illusion cracked, when his career stalled and hers, or so he believed, remained pathetically small, he looked elsewhere, to Jessica. Beautiful, ambitious, expensive Jessica, who'd always lived just beyond her means, who'd always wanted more. Sarah picked up her purse and headed for the door. She had a company to run, and a reckoning to deliver. The Hartwell Industries building gleamed against the morning sky, all steel and glass. A monument to innovation her father had built from nothing. Sarah walked through the main entrance, and the security guard, Thomas, nodded respectfully. He was one of the few who knew the truth. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell," he said quietly. "Good morning, Thomas." She moved past him toward the private elevator, the one that went directly to the executive floor. Her heartbeat was steady now, calm. The shock of the text message had crystallized into something harder. Clarity. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor. Her assistant, Grace, looked up with knowing eyes. "They're in the boardroom, Ms. Hartwell, just as you suspected." "Thank you, Grace. Hold all my calls." Sarah walked down the corridor, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, she could see them. Ethan in his expensive suit, the one she'd watched him buy last month with money he shouldn't have had. Jessica in designer heels laughing at something he'd said. Their backs were to the door. She opened it without knocking. They sprang apart, Jessica's hand flying from Ethan's chest. Both faces shifted through confusion, surprise, then careful concern. "Sarah?" Jessica's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Oh, honey, what are you doing here?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I told you not to contact me." Sarah stepped inside, letting the door close behind her with a soft click. "You did, very clearly." 3 words. Impressive brevity, Ethan. "You used to be so verbose with your promises." "Look," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to do it like that, but you weren't listening. We've been over for months. You had to know." "What I know," Sarah said softly, walking to the head of the table, "is that you filed for divorce this morning. What I know is that you've been sleeping with my best friend for at least 3 months. What I know is that you think I'm pathetic." Jessica moved forward, her expression painted with pity. "Sarah, we didn't mean for it to happen. Sometimes people just connect, and sometimes people steal." Sarah's voice cut through the air like a blade. $2 million to be exact, funneled through fake vendors and shell companies. Very creative, actually. I'm almost impressed. The color drained from Jessica's face. Ethan's expression shifted from guilt to confusion to something approaching fear. "What are you talking about?" Sarah pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life, displaying spreadsheet after spreadsheet, transactions, dates, wire transfers, all highlighted in red. "I'm talking about fraud. I'm talking about embezzlement. I'm talking about the fact that for the past year, you've both been stealing from Hartwell Industries." She paused, watching their faces. "From me? From you?" Ethan laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Sarah, you're a secretary. What do you—" "I'm the CEO." Her voice was quiet, steady. "I'm the owner. I'm the woman whose father built this company, and I'm the woman who's been running it for the past 3 years, while you both paraded around thinking you were so clever." Silence crashed into the room like a wave. Jessica gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Ethan's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Sarah walked slowly around the table, her fingers trailing along the polished surface. "Explain to me what's impossible, Ethan. That a woman could run a company? That your wife could be more than you ever imagined? Or that you could be this spectacularly stupid?" Jessica found her voice first, shrill and desperate. "You're lying. Everyone knows the CEO is some reclusive man, some mysterious figure no one's ever met." Sarah smiled. "That's because I chose to stay hidden, to protect myself, to see who people really were when they thought I was nobody." She turned to face them both. "And now I know exactly who you are." Ethan stepped forward, his face reddening. "Even if this is true, you can't prove we stole anything. It's your word against the forensic audit I commissioned 2 weeks ago," Sarah interrupted. "Against the surveillance footage? Against the digital trail you were both too arrogant to properly hide?" She tilted her head. "Marcus, would you come in, please?" The door opened and Marcus entered, a thick folder in his hands and 2 police officers behind him. Jessica made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "No," Ethan breathed. "Sarah, wait. We can talk about this. We're done talking." Her voice carried no anger, only finality. "You ended our marriage by text message. 3 words, so here are mine. You're both fired." "You can't do this," Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face now, real ones. "Please, Sarah, I'm sorry. We made mistakes, but Mistakes? Sarah's composure cracked just slightly. You were my best friend, Jessica. I trusted you with everything. I gave you a career. I gave you opportunities. And you repaid me by stealing from me and sleeping with my husband. Ex-husband, Ethan spat, venom replacing fear. And you know what? I'm glad I left. You were always so cold, so distant, always working, always distracted. I needed someone who actually cared. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. She saw the weakness there, the insecurity masked as confidence, the little boy playing dress-up in a man's suit. I worked, she said quietly, to build something that would last. I worked to honor my father's memory. I worked because I believed in something bigger than myself. She paused. But you're right about one thing. I was distracted. I was so busy trying to be the perfect wife to a man who never deserved me that I didn't see what was right in front of my face. She turned to Marcus. Process the charges. I want everything documented. As the officer stepped forward, Jessica crumpled, sobbing. Please, Sarah, please don't do this. I'll pay it back. I'll do anything. But Sarah was already walking toward the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back one final time. You wanted to know what I'd do when I arrived? This is what I do. I protect what's mine, and I make sure the people who betray me never forget it. The door closed behind her, muffling Jessica's cries and Ethan's shouted protests. In the hallway, Grace waited with a fresh cup of coffee. The board meeting is in 20 minutes, Miss Hartwell, and your attorney called. The divorce papers Ethan filed are invalid. He forged several signatures. Sarah took the coffee, letting its warmth seep into her hands. Add fraud to the charges then. Already done. She walked to her office, the space her father had once occupied. His portrait hung on the wall, stern and proud. She'd kept her promise to him, to never let anyone diminish what he'd built. But she'd also learned something he'd never taught her, that hiding wasn't protection, it was prison. That night, the news broke. Hartwell Industries CEO reveals identity in dramatic fraud bust. Sarah's face, previously unknown, now filled every screen. The media went wild. The mysterious billionaire was a woman, was young, was brilliant, had been hiding in plain sight while running one of the most successful tech companies in the country. Sarah watched the coverage from her apartment, the one she'd soon be leaving for good. Her phone rang. It was her attorney. Sarah, Ethan's trying to claim he's entitled to half your assets. He's arguing he didn't know about your wealth. She smiled faintly. Discovery will be interesting then. Make sure they find the records of every time I paid his credit card bills. Every car payment, every business expense that was actually my money keeping him afloat. With pleasure. After hanging up, Sarah stood at the window, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ethan was realizing the full scope of what he'd lost. Not just a wife, but a future. Not just a relationship, but an empire he'd been too blind to see. Jessica was likely in a holding cell, her designer life crumbling around her. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. They'd both wanted more. They'd just been stealing from the person who already had everything. A year later, Sarah stood in the Hartwell Industries conference room, now completely redesigned with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in cascades of natural light. The company had grown by 40% under her public leadership. Turned out, when you stepped out of the shadows, people paid attention. Ethan had been sentenced to 5 years for fraud and forgery. Jessica got 3. Sarah had watched their sentencing from the back of the courtroom, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that justice, however cold, was still justice. The divorce had been finalized within months once the truth emerged. Ethan got nothing, not because Sarah was cruel, but because he'd never contributed anything. Every asset, every investment, every dollar had been hers. The prenup she'd insisted on, that he'd signed without reading because he'd thought she had nothing, protected everything. Grace knocked softly on the door. Ms. Hartwell, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal. Sarah turned, curious. Who is it? An older woman stepped in, elegant and poised. My name is Catherine Price. I was your father's business partner before you were born. Sarah's breath caught. I didn't know he had a partner. It was brief, but I knew him well. And when I saw what you did, how you honored his legacy while protecting yourself, I had to meet you." Catherine smiled. "Your father would be so proud." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, unexpected and raw. "I'm not sure about that. I hid for so long. I lied to people I loved." "You survived," Catherine said gently, "in a world that would have eaten you alive if you'd shown weakness. That's not lying. That's strategy." She paused. "But now you're free. The question is, what will you do with that freedom?" Sarah looked out the window at the city stretching endlessly before her. For so long, her life had been defined by what she'd lost: her father, her marriage, her trust. But standing here now, she realized she'd gained something more valuable: herself. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "I'll stop hiding. I'll stop apologizing for being powerful. And I'll make sure that every woman who walks into this building knows she doesn't have to shrink herself to be loved." Catherine's smile widened. "Then you're exactly the CEO this company needs." After Catherine left, Sarah sat at her desk and opened her laptop. There was an email from Ethan, sent from prison. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." She hovered over it for a long moment, then deleted it without reading. Some apologies came too late. Some bridges, once burned, weren't worth rebuilding. Instead, she opened a blank document and began typing. A new initiative: the Hartwell Foundation for Women in Business. Scholarships, mentorships, resources for women building companies while the world told them they couldn't. Her father had taught her to be strong. Ethan had taught her to be careful. Jessica had taught her to trust her instincts. And now, finally, Sarah was teaching herself to be free. Outside her window, the sun set in brilliant shades of amber and gold, painting the sky with the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time since that cold text message shattered her world, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Not for revenge, not for vindication, but for the simple, radical possibility that she could be both powerful and true. That she could own her empire without apology. That she could love again, differently this time, with eyes wide open. The woman who'd arrived at that boardroom a year ago had been armed with evidence and fury. The woman sitting here now was armed with something far more dangerous: peace, and the absolute certainty that she would never again mistake being underestimated for being weak. Sarah smiled, closed her laptop, and walked out into the evening. The city hummed around her, alive and electric. Somewhere in that vastness, new stories were beginning, new betrayals, new triumphs, new women learning that survival wasn't just about enduring the storm. Sometimes it was about becoming the lightning. 3 years had passed since that morning text message changed everything. Sarah stood on stage at the annual Women's Business Summit, looking out at thousands of faces: young women, older women, women of every background, all hungry for the truth no one had told them. "They asked me to share my story today," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. "The headline version you all know: betrayed by husband and best friend, secret billionaire CEO, dramatic confrontation, justice served." She paused. "But that's not the real story." The auditorium fell silent. "The real story is that I spent 5 years of my life making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I hid my success because I was afraid it would threaten the man I loved. I apologized for my ambition. I dimmed my light so his wouldn't look so weak in comparison." Her eyes swept across the crowd. "And you know what that got me? A 3-word breakup text and $2 million stolen." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "Here's what I learned, and I need you to hear this. Your power is not something to apologize for. Your success is not something to hide. And anyone who asks you to be less so, they can feel like more, is not someone who deserves a place in your life." She stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage. "Ethan didn't betray me because I wasn't enough. He betrayed me because he wasn't. Jessica didn't steal from me because she was desperate. She stole because she felt entitled to what I'd built. Their actions were never about my worth. They were about their weakness." Sarah's voice softened. "For the longest time, I thought revenge would heal me. Watching them face consequences felt satisfying in the moment. But you know what actually healed me? realizing that their betrayal freed me. It freed me from living a lie, from pretending to be helpless when I was powerful, from waiting for permission to take up space. She smiled, and it was genuine, warm. So here's my message to every woman listening. Stop shrinking. Stop hiding your brilliance because someone else can't handle the light. Stop playing small in your own life story. The right people, the ones who truly love you, will celebrate your success, not sabotage it. The applause started slowly, then built into a wave that filled the auditorium. Sarah waited for it to quiet. And if someone sends you that text message, the one that tries to reduce your worth to nothing, remember this: their opinion of you is not your reality. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after. She took a breath. 3 years ago, I walked into a boardroom and reclaimed my power. But the real victory wasn't in their shock or their consequences. It was in finally seeing myself clearly, not as someone's wife, not as someone's employee, not as someone's victim, but as exactly who I'd always been: capable, strong, worthy. The audience rose to their feet. So here's what I want you to do, Sarah continued. Stop waiting for life to happen to you. Stop letting other people write your story. If you've been hiding who you are, step into the light. If you've been tolerating betrayal, walk away. If you've been playing small, take up the space you deserve. And if someone can't handle the real you, the powerful you, the unapologetic you, let them go. She smiled one last time. Your life is waiting. Stop asking permission to live it. As Sarah left the stage, her phone buzzed with thousands of messages from women around the world. Messages of gratitude, messages of courage, messages from women ready to stop hiding. That night, she sat in her office at the Hartwell Foundation headquarters, the organization that had now helped over 10,000 women start their own businesses. On her desk was a framed quote she'd written herself. They wanted me to be small, so I built an empire. They wanted me to be silent, so I found my voice. They wanted me to stay broken, so I became unbreakable, not for revenge, but for every woman who's been told she's too much when she was exactly enough all along. Sarah turned off the lights and headed home, not to the apartment where she'd once hidden, but to the penthouse she'd bought in her own name, with her own money without apology. The city sparkled below. Somewhere out there were women reading her story, women in bad marriages, women being underestimated, women hiding their gifts, and maybe, just maybe, her truth would give them permission to claim their own, because that was the real lesson. Not that betrayal made you stronger, but that you were always strong. You just had to stop letting other people convince you otherwise.